This meeting was probably almost about a year in the making, and it started when Demetra Smith, the vice chair of the Commission on Human Rights, and I were invited to go to the encampment in Roseland and take a tour. And there were some things that we saw there that were very concerning for us, especially in light of not only the situation that existed, but also the plans that were underway to disband the encampments and the way that it had grown as a result of a number of the other encampments being disbanded around the city and county.
And big thanks for the Human Rights Commission for the work that they are doing and their involvement in this particular issue, recognizing it as an issue of human rights. I'm Julie Combs, and I'm a council member for the city of Santa Rosa. We have, as a city, strongly moved toward providing increased shelter beds, increased funding for services. But while we wait for homes to be built, what do people do? Where do they go? And our city has adopted a policy of moving people along. And I was keen to hear of a longer running successful project that I understand has been going on in Seattle, and am delighted that we have managed to fly Sharon Lee here from Seattle. This is Sharon Lee. She's with the not-for-profit Low Income Housing Institute, and she's going to talk to us about the partnership ways that Seattle has implemented, I'm hesitant to call them encampment, tiny home villages, so that folks have safe, secure places to live until more suitable housing is available.
So I'm the executive director of the Low Income Housing Institute, or LEHI, and we're primarily a housing nonprofit organization, and we've been around for 27 years. And I'm the founding director. We now have 10 tiny house villages in Seattle. And we are actually building a few more. And we have volunteers. We have hundreds of volunteers, churches, school students, vocational programs, businesses. And so we sort of have tiny houses pouring out of our ears because people are building them for us. We think the obvious solution is permanent housing, bricks and mortar housing, transitional, permanent supportive housing. But we also have urban rest stops, which are hygiene centers for homeless people. We actually operate 3 hygiene centers with toilets, showers, laundry for homeless people in 3 different parts of the city. And then we also have...
Yeah, those are separate from these homes.
Yes, and homeless people can come early in the morning to do their, to take a shower, wash their clothes, get ready for work, and then they can come after work and also do their laundry and get ready for the next day. So we have about 2,200 units of affordable housing. The one on the left is a food bank, a food pantry on the first floor, housing for homeless young adults, 18 to 25 on the second floor, third and fourth floor, low-wage workers. And then there's also a cafe with a barista training program. And so we have homeless young adults who are getting trained and getting employed in the cafe. These are examples of the tiny house villages in Seattle. The big green one, the one on the top, green, that is actually adapting the tough shed. So we went to Home Depot and said, okay, get us a tough shed with a door. They have to be on skids so that we can move them, and then put in windows, and then our volunteers insulated them. And so those were the only ones we did with tough sheds. The other ones you could see are all built by volunteers. We have a do-it-yourself booklet, and they're all 8 by 12. The tough shed, I think, cost us maybe between $4,000, whereas the tiny houses that we build are $2,500 for materials. So this is why we focused on tiny houses, because a lot of people do not fit in the traditional shelters. This is how the villages work. Some are managed by LEHI, my agency. Some are democratic decision-making with grassroots organization that we partner with. There's a strict code of conduct depending on the village. There could be criteria for so many hours of work a week. You have to commit to nonviolence. No weapons are allowed. Some of them require a very strict sobriety, like clean and sober. Others, there's sort of like it's a behavioral contract, okay? So there's some, each of them are a little different. The democratic self-management, we try to create a sense of community so that people meet, they have to attend a mandatory meeting, they distribute and agree on chores, and they also work collectively to keep the place safe and clean. Now, because we're a nonprofit housing provider, the city contracts with us on city-owned property. We actually have port property, church property, private property, and we take out insurance on all the sites. And so the city actually feels comfortable contracting with us because we pay for all the utilities, water, sewer, garbage, operating costs. So these are some of the services that are being provided. Housing resources, that is like the #1 need. Employment, education, childcare, transportation, and reunification with family or friends. And then we have, these are the, if you just look at the top line, our case managers, this is like last year, our case managers moved over 300 people from tiny houses into long-term housing. 250 people obtained employment, and then 80 people were reunited with family or friends. So these are examples of our partners in terms of construction. And you can see on the right is the Tulalip tribe. They've done over 16 tiny houses. So the high school students and the programs, vocational programs, and the union, laborers union, carpenters union, they're like thrilled with the opportunity to actually, instead of like building a table, right, they're building tiny houses for homeless people. So we have a tiny house kit, like do-it-yourself kit, that we have online that you can get, and the cost is $2,700. The material cost is $2,500, and $200 is the cost of transportation. We take a flatbed truck and we pick it up and move it, so that the extra $200 is for actually moving a tiny house. And these are our partners. This gentleman was going to build one tiny house a month, and then he is building in his backyard, and then we come, every month we come and pick up his tiny house, and then he gets all his friends and neighbors to come and help. So over the year, we're getting 12 tiny houses from one person. Yeah. So these are the, again, the Youth Build, which is a program for at-risk youth. They're building for us. Apprenticeship for non-traditional employment for women. They're all women-built tiny houses. Yeah. Upper right, we have elementary schools with enthusiastic parents helping the kids build a tiny house. And these are Sawhorse Revolution. These are high school students getting credit for building. These are sort of more high-end tiny houses. You can see on the upper right, like they put in all the shelving and bedding, everything. So we have, this is Microsoft volunteers in the United Way Day of Caring. We put a Facebook post out, please come this Saturday or this Sunday, come to this village and help us build a tiny house, and we'll have like 120 people will show up. And we have experienced volunteer coordinators. And then you can see on the lower right, a fence. The church said to us, we want you to be a good neighbor. So of course, we got the most expensive cedar wood fence we could find to be a good neighbor. And they said to us, we do not want you to use porta potties. They are an eyesore. So that's when we built restrooms, plum toilets, instead of porta potties. So far, we've had 43% of the people now have income and jobs, right? And 41%, it may not look like it's high, but 41% of people who have exited, we've gotten them long-term housing or transitional housing for up to 2 years. And so they are on their way, and that frees up space for other people. So we call it bridge housing. Bridge housing, so it's a bridge to housing. In terms of the cost, our cost is far less expensive than the city's navigation center. I don't know, you've probably heard about San Francisco having a navigation center. Well, we have one that costs like, probably $2 million a year to operate, and people are still living in shared quarters, like the rooms are shared with other people. Even if they can bring their partner and pets in, they're sharing it with other people. We literally have people who have been sent and gone through rapid rehousing, and the rapid rehousing is a serious problem because our rents are so high, so they're on a subsidy for 6 months, and then they yank the rapid rehousing subsidy, and then they end up homeless in our tiny house village, right? And then they may get a eviction on their record, and they may get they violate the terms of their lease on their record, or a judgment entered against them, right? So we have serious problems with rapid rehousing. So we have 2 consultants that came to Seattle that just brainwashed all the data people and all the human service people saying, rapid rehousing is the only thing you should do. They go around the country and they replace the name of the city, and they say, Seattle, Houston, whatever, right? And they're the same consultants.
If we had as many people in rapid rehousing actually moving off the street, we would have no homeless people.
That's right.
Just from the data, within, I think,
That's
2
right.
years.
They said that to us.
Right.
They said to us in 2 years, they say the same thing. They said to us, in 2 years, you can start shutting down the shelters because you won't need it.
Right.
And you don't need any more money, right? Right? We also have supportive service costs. We give people bus tickets to go to appointments, and we have 1 hot meal a day. This is the ones that are funded by the city of Seattle. So the city considers us very inexpensive because we're housing 12% of their homeless folks, 12% of the population that's funded from the city, and we're only using 3 or 4% of their investment dollars. Just so you know, we have had very large contentious meetings in neighborhoods around tiny house villages. We had the Chamber of Commerce organized a petition and opposing the tiny house village in Ballard, which is sort of an upscale neighborhood. And after we set up the village, the chair of the Ballard Chamber of Commerce chaired the Community Advisory Committee and is now a big supporter. So you can move people. And one thing we do is we invite people to tour a tiny house village. If they have, they have the fear of the unknown. And there's always a community advisory committee. Each village has its own advisory committee that includes the Chamber of Commerce, the Community Council, the businesses like the Starbucks next door or the neighbors next door, and church leaders. So they meet once a month to monitor the performance of the village. And they end up helping the village. They become like supporters of the village over time. So I think the tiny houses, even though they cost $2,500 each, they're insulated, they're stick built, and they would last. If you took care of the tiny houses, they would last, 15 years. I get attacked sometimes by my housing peers, the nonprofit housing folks, saying, Sharon, why are you working on tiny houses when you can be building, like the second slide, multifamily affordable housing? Well, every apartment unit I build, just the apartment, one apartment is $300,000, right? And that's going to help one person, and it's going to take me 4 years. It takes me 4 years to put up an apartment building. In the meantime, as I showed you, there's 169 people who died on the streets, right? So obviously, I think you have to do both. You have got to build the long-term housing, but it takes 4 years. And then you've got to deal with the immediate homelessness crisis of people I mean, like, people have to survive. It is a human right. How can you let people just die on the streets? Most of the people who are living in a tent on their own, they will definitely go to a tiny house village. They will move to a tiny house village before they consider anything else, right? So what the mayor did in Seattle was she directed her department that handles all real estate, and they went through every single property owned by parks, utilities, street. It could be mixed-use commercial, as opposed to like 100% single-family residential, you know. So that, assuming that it would be easier to site a tiny house village in a mixed-use commercial zone than in a single-family neighborhood. And then the mayor specifically had multiple meetings, right? And they had the police at the meeting, the fire department, the street department, the public utility, as well as homeless people and myself, and would speak about how it was going to be operated and managed. And then the police would talk about, did crime increase by this village? Did crime increase at that village, right? And so the public heard directly about whether, and I don't know if you saw this Wall Street Journal article, but it surveyed tiny house villages across the country and talked about, you know, increasing crime. And for the most part, in 80% of the village, the crime actually went down because there's security, there's someone watching out, there's security lights, there's security cameras, there's people, you know, walking the block and making sure that the whole neighborhood was safe.
I'm just delighted that you came, so thank you very much. Thank you. You are how we will make these changes.